Like, you know what I was we're not going to do it like that because it's more about your personal experience. But if you want to call out any of those individual things, absolutely go ahead and do it. And what I was saying,
Don't look at it closely.
if I feel like in the conversation we get in touch with one on one enough, then I'll just bring up as a follow-up question and say, hey, what about health?
Oh, hi. Thank you. Yay. That's scary.
The little mic is there, everyone doesn't actually talk.
Oh, okay. Yep, I will actually talk.
The password actually was the PA 55 word dealio.
Which everybody's is
Standard
apparently.
thing. And then I wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help you speed this up. There's some things that
He will take, well, I told you about me taking my downloads off all the time. That helped.
So within Outlook, your email, have you ever sorted for size of files?
This happened today. You've seen it so many times.
Right click on the all.
We can't afford that much, so we gotta follow up.
This is your script here. And I'm going to take this one with you. So then I think this is I read it all because it's Christmas time, so that means that I we used to live up in Suel. We bought a house in Short North with the back all the restaurants and stuff. And then like, there's city guards that's firing against us.
Okay, real quick moment with our talkers here.
Jerry went to
About your impressions of what this discussion might be about. We are addressing inequities. We did have inequalities. I guess we could have a conversation about the difference between those two words. But we're glad that you're here joining us today.
So it's natural to look over to LaShaun and talk with him, but occasionally look out to our audience.
Now Andy's going to talk and talk over us. So there you go. Andy is prepping our speakers.
Scarf.
What's that?
Oh, you didn't tell me about my scarf.
Oh, well, sometimes you wear it as a decoration anyway.
I know.
You didn't notice last week I tried to do that. It didn't
Oh
work
my
for
God.
me.
I just need to get it together today.
Go ahead and get you up there, comfortable time check.
All right. Hi, everyone.
Just keep the conversation on.
All right.
Don't wait to be asked a question. I always tell them you can jump right in if you feel it.
Does everyone know our speakers today? I'm sure a lot of you
Jane,
have
how
some
are you?
relationship with some of these folks.
Yep.
Okay.
Kind of keep them off the side a little bit. The main thing with these mics, I want you to be
Hi Seema, it's nice to see you. Good morning. Here's Jane.
Except I'm not on camera.
Photo bomb. Yeah, we're like,
Okay.
I don't know, it feels like we're about
You need me to be
5
on?
minutes behind.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know whether I don't think we are. I think we're I think we're on time.
Are you seeing it on time?
No, we're behind.
Oh, you guys are behind. Yeah, there I am.
Yeah, see,
There I am.
Yours is really behind.
mine is even farther behind than yours.
Yeah.
So how's everybody doing on this great morning? We're not seeing very much chit chat. Got 30 of you watching. If anybody wants to chat with us, hi guys.
Hi.
Hi Dingy. Hi
Carol. Hi,
Carol.
Dinky.
Thanks for saying hi. Feels a little bit more like you're in the room with us. Hi.
Hello.
Well, that's nice.
Thank you for being here, Dingy. Good to see you.
I'm gonna make a shameless plug. So
Montra's making a shameless plug.
this shirt right here,
I was gonna say you gotta stand up.
it can be purchased at homage.com. And the
Okay, see you guys.
All right.
The proceeds go to my brother's keeper.
Hi Ralph. I'm glad you're here joining us. Thanks for sponsoring. Okay, that's right. We are also hoping that we're going to talk more specifically about constructive conversation and actionable items.
Yes.
At 12:35, I know I make the comment.
Thanks for joining
Hi, guys.
Communities in Schools of Ohio.
Very good job. And Homage should be giving Mantra some commission for her little plug that she made today.
Oh, is it not loud enough, Dinky? I don't know how we can turn up the. I think maybe because there are other voices in the background.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry
People
about
are
that.
people are
It
talking.
is a
around
great
us.
shirt. Thank you.
It is good.
So what'll happen is.
Very good.
Hi, Bill Lafayette.
Hey Bill, good to see you.
We're gonna roll an intro, which you won't be able to see or hear. But I'll say rolling intro, and then it's 3, 2, 1, Steve. And he's done enough time, he'll know. You can take it off.
The other thing we'll say right off the bat is to remember, if you haven't submitted a question via your registration, anytime in chat you can submit one, and Mantra and I will see that and get it passed on to Jane. We kind of tend to get a lot of questions right at the end, and we can't fit them in. So if you have a pressing question, feel free to throw it up, even starting right now, or as soon as the forum starts, and we'll see it and pass it along, and hopefully you'll get to direct that to our panel.
Yeah, and if we don't get to all the questions, I apologize in advance, but we will try our best.
Mhm.
All right, we're
Oh,
at
now I'm hearing myself. I should have turned that down.
still.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I had mine up to 100, but I could hear myself. I think part of the issue is the masks.
Yeah.
So,
I got 50 people watching now.
all right, that's great.
Hey, we gonna do the photo before or after?
We can do it after, I guess. Is that all right, Rick?
After. So, once we're done, we'll be rolling
Are we
credits and
off
stuff.
now?
We gotta get the official photo.
Oh,
So just hang your-
sorry.
your
So
seat
we
for
only
a few
got,
more
we
minutes.
have 4 more minutes.
Okay.
So I think we can
And
still.
we'll get that thing
All right.
Matt.
Hi, Greg Dodd.
Oh, hi, Greg. Thanks for buying the table today,
Yeah,
man. We
thanks for the
appreciate it.
table.
We are very excited. This is going to be a great conversation.
It really is. I'm excited.
Nope, hard to know. What's up, Chad?
And Greg Trout says hello to you guys.
Ed is in quarantine.
Hi, Solanas. Thank you for joining us. Now I bet you can hear us better, since no one is
Yeah.
talking anymore. Mantra, any last words of wisdom that you'd like to say?
Listen. That's all I'll say.
I agree.
Listen,
That's
it'll
hard
be
for
a-
big talkers like myself.
Yeah, it'll be, no. It'll be a fantastic panel. and my friend Chris Suel is the best. So he will definitely, he'll definitely, he will
You need a
definitely
PR
give it
person,
to
man,
you.
you got it.
Oh yeah, Chris is awesome. He'll definitely give it to us straight.
All right, that's what we want to hear. Yeah,
Oh, you guys should thank
Oh, I'm
Greg.
sorry you guys can't
We
hear
did.
us.
Oh, you did already?
yeah.
They said
They
that,
say that
there's a
the
couple people
sound-
that said they can't hear
The
us.
sound is not good, I guess.
I don't know.
You got those things on your face, nobody can understand.
Well, there's that.
Well, I
But this
mean-
is a lot closer than it used to be. You'd think
Yeah.
you could hear us a little better. I'm sorry, the sound isn't good, guys. Since we're talking through fabric, it's kind of hard. I know. But the sound should be perfect for the actual forum, so we hope so.
Ladies.
Hi.
Oh,
Thank you, Rick.
Say hi to everyone, Rick. Hi, Rick's on camera. All right. Gave us a beautiful calendar.
1 minute, 1 minute.
Thank you, Hotman Consulting. We will get that question in our lineup. That's a good question. Yeah, and don't forget, at any time, you can throw a question up there and we'll see it. Make sure we get it to Jane. I think we're about to sign off.
Yep, I think we are.
Thanks again for joining us early, guys. It was great seeing all of you. Seeing all of you.
Seeing all the comments.
That's right. Chatting with you in the chat box.
All right, coming up on the noon hour, stand by to roll opening credit.
Hello, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Steve Marks, Chair of the CMC Board of Trustees and President of Hannah News Service here in Columbus. It's great to see you. Let me start by welcoming two new members, Tina Pierce of Worth and Sandra Pritz. Thank you all. Conversation moves us forward, and members power our conversations. We need you, the patrons and fans of CMC, to step up and support CMC by becoming a member of CMC today. Metro Club live streaming is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation and in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch and PNC. We'd like to thank those of you watching today who purchased a virtual seat for this forum. We are very grateful for your support and are able to continue live streaming services in large part because of you. Thank you again. You can learn more about CMC, register for events, join or renew your membership, or make a donation anytime at columbusmetroclub.org. Today's forum is presented in partnership with the United Way of Central Ohio and sponsored by Encova and Marzetti. I'd like to introduce Matt Shirty, General Counsel and Secretary at Lancaster Colony Corp., to introduce our forum. Matt?
Thank you, Steve. I'm Matt Shirty, General Counsel of Lancaster Colony, which is the parent company of Team Marzetti. After the tragic death of George Floyd, our company decided to do more to bring diversity and inclusion to the forefront of our culture. We had the good fortune of bringing in Clarence Mingo as our VP of ESG, and ever since then, he and I have been working side by side, not only to increase minority representation in our company, but also to have the difficult conversations that may surround this topic. It has been a matter of a great personal journey and professional journey for me. I couldn't be more happy to be a part of it. And while we all may have different opinions about how to move forward, two things seem universal to me. The first is that we have to take the time to listen and learn from people with different perspectives. And the second is that we must work together to empower change in our community. And with that, I'm pleased to ask you to join me in welcoming Program Manager of My Brother's Keeper, Department of Neighborhood, City of Columbus, Chris Suel, community activist and mother of Henry Green, Adrienne Hood, CEO of Africentric Personal Development Shop, Jerry Saunders Sr., and our host today, Assistant Executive Director and Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, Franklin County Children's Services, LaShaun Carter. LaShaun, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Matt. If hindsight is 20/20, what are we willing to do differently in 2021 to dismantle the influence of systemic racism? What we have come to understand is that the system that is institutional racism was created, implemented, and sustained with intentionality, and it is that same intentionality that is required to dismantle it. In an effort to solve for that opening question, I would like to take this moment in time to explore the word grace. Grace is defined as a concept that means undeserved kindness. It is going out of your way to bestow your compassion and love towards a person, even if they might not appreciate it or return the favor. At its fullest extent, it is choosing to act positively towards someone who might hate you or have done you wrong. That is the most generous interpretation of the word I can muster. Amid the last month or so, I have to be honest that it is hard to offer grace in the midst of so much oppression and heartache. Almost like a grace fatigue has set in. A feeling where you are tired of giving grace and begin crying out for accountability and atonement. I have come to understand that one of the shortcomings of defining grace is that it doesn't account for the person that receives our most generous or graceful interpretations of their actions. In the last month, African Americans in Columbus have been asked by society to offer grace in light of the murders of Casey Goodson Jr. and Andre Hill in our very own backyard. When the protest started last summer, I recall many people in Columbus wondering aloud, why are so many people protesting so strongly against something that happened over 700 miles away? Well, for many of us, it has always been abundantly clear that the conditions that led to the murder of George Floyd exist in our very own community. And if we are unwilling to do anything about those conditions, it is only a matter of time before it happens here again. You see, Columbus is not immune to the pandemic of police violence. We have simply lived with it as part of our reality, and it continues to happen. Over the next hour, I invite you to pay attention to a few things. I invite you to pay attention to your breathing, your heart rate, the texture of your skin. These are the systems that communicate stress to our brains. When these systems are maxed out, it is then when we are most challenged to offer grace. And yet, in this moment in time, that is precisely what we are asked to do. Offering grace comes at a great emotional cost. We are a society in crisis, and the people furthest from opportunity are expected to offer the most grace. We are expected to do much of the emotional heavy lifting while simultaneously extending to those with all the opportunities the space to move forward without the emotional responsibilities vulnerability and honesty require. In the midst of the continued loss of life, there looms the existential threat of violence that puts those that are the most vulnerable in a perpetual state of crisis. The truth of it, though, is that grace is not just for the vulnerable as a preconceived construct that we need to carefully define, nor is it a permanent fixture in our lives. It lives on a delicate balance, in fact. If we call for grace without calling for accountability and restitution, even the most graceful among us will become weary. We are feeling that now. Instead, we have to invite each other to search that feeling we get in our gut when all is unraveling and act on our instinct to fight for change. What we can't become is a community that relies on grace in absence of our work to acknowledge or reconcile our need for it. We certainly can't let grace become the balm for untreated affliction. In the wake of recent events, many are being asked to be graceful yet again. There was an attack on our country that will go down in history as one of the most reprehensible acts ever known against our democracy. Yet there are many ready to sweep it under the rug to unify our country or show grace to those grieving the tough loss in a hard-fought election. That same desire to heal, recover, and repair is required when facing down racism. Since 1619, when those first 20 enslaved Africans arrived at the ports in Jamestown, Virginia, the Black experience has been riddled with atrocity after brutal atrocity. Where do we go from here? Anywhere but here. If we are to ever truly dismantle systemic racism, we have to commit to the necessary conversations and the corresponding actions that will eradicate the influence racism has had on our society for far too long. As we move forward, we need to begin the conversations that will lead to social change. We need to uncover solutions that translate into long-term investment and partnership with the Black community. Over the next few minutes, we will discuss the issues of wealth and poverty, health, education, and criminal justice. We need to acknowledge that while these issues are persistent and worsening, it will take our intentional effort to reverse our most devastating outcomes. I'd now like to invite our esteemed panel to chime in. This is meant to be a free-flowing conversation, so feel free to jump in. But this initial question, we're going to start with Mr. Jerry Saunders. As we talk about systemic inequities, what does that look like to you? What about your work as an advocate or your lived experience inform your perspective?
Thank you, Mr. Carter. First of all, I'd like to thank the Columbus Metropolitan Club and United Way for inviting me to be able to contribute in this conversation with the rest of the panelists. When we talk about racism, I see it on two levels. I see the first, for individuals, I call that biases. And that could be in a number of ways for color, wealth, size of people, where you live, a number of places. The racism, to me, is systemic. And I see that different than the biases. Now, for me, when I come from a personal perspective, just to make sure people can understand me, I'm like a history buff. I like some movies, not too many. But one of my favorite movies is The Matrix. And those who are not familiar with The Matrix, it's like a dystopia, which is the opposite of utopia. Utopia is perfect. Dystopia is where inhumane folks are acting, being cruel to one another, not taking care of the environment and all of that. Well, that's this in society that the humans are unaware of, that they're assimilated and they're participating in. And it's actually what we call the Matrix in the movie, and then they find out that it's being ran by intelligent machines. It's not real, but that's what they see as their real world. Well, for me, what I see here is, with the racism part, is I see this same type of society that's not really the true society that was created by white males and programmed people in effect to be product or consumers, so that those individuals, select few individuals, can maintain dominance and power in society. For me, greed and power are the driving forces. Racism is a strategy. It's a strategy that's used to distract people from wondering why they're the ones that are in power. Because, see, at the end of the day, what I see is one race, human race. But this racism takes the human race and says, you're not going to like somebody by the complexion of their skin. Now, we're born innocent, but we end up not liking folks by the complexion of their skin or their culture when it's really just one race. But that's that strategy that's put in there that keeps us going back and forth with one another. And I'm going to hold up here because I could go on and on, but I just wanted to give you my piece on racism. I think that it's systemic. I think that it's used there to separate us and to keep us apart, while certain folks in a capitalistic society now dominate and maintain that control. Because if you recall, the first time we were brought here was for economic reasons, to do the farming. While I know we talk about 1619, those are indentured slaves that were supposedly have a deal to be working for 2, 7 years, 9 years. The first brother that really got caught was a guy named John Punch in 1640, where the Virginian Commons actually legally, for the lawyers here, legally made it so that he would have indentured servitude for the rest of his life. Now, the record was so John Casler did it too, and he was involved on the farm with Anthony Johnson, who was a brother from Angola who had the farming there. But that happened legally. I can tell you a little bit more about that, but I don't want to just consume. We said this is a rolling conversation, but we can go on.
That historical knowledge, absolutely.
That has something to do with the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
And so while I'm at it, I might as well, if y'all don't mind.
Please.
I don't mind. Well, I'll just tell you. So what happened, Anthony Johnson was a brother from Angola, and he had a large plantation. And so he had folks who were here were indentured slaves. So two of the guys decided they had did their 7 years, and they took off. White guy and a black guy, they took off. And so they send the patrol after them, you know, and these were, at that time, which is nowadays the police, but the slave trade, they catch slave catchers. They sent them after, they caught them, brought them back. They go before court, and the white guy has to do a couple more years on his indentured servitude. The brother has to do it for the rest of his life. So when I think about that, I think about prison systems right now, how they occur, where African Americans will have an extended amount of time as opposed to other folks. And that was back in 1654-55 with Johnson, and 1640 with John Punch. So this has been going on a long time, and it's all been about economics.
Yeah, and the different realities have been going on for a long time as well.
Right, and every time you turn around, something occurs that perpetuates that. Woodrow Wilson, when he was in, did the Federal Reserve, which is capitalism. He also did The Birth of the Nation, showed that movie there in the White House. That's where what do you call those now when you do the first movie? The
premiere.
The premiere in the White House, teaching the KKK and also putting down black folks in there, all those stereotypes, and that occurred then from the president's office. Yeah. And I think that similarly has been occurring in the last 4 years.
Well, thank you for getting us started. I want to pull in Adrienne and Chris to talk a little bit about your perspective on systemic issues, and whether it be through the lens of your work or your lived experience. How do you see it in Columbus specifically?
Well, I concur with so many things that Mr. Saunders said, and I have coined it as such, the orchestrated evil of this country that is still very well alive and functioning intentionally as it was created to be. So what that looks like to me personally, I became a member of what I call the Involuntary Club 4.5 years ago, when my son was killed by Columbus police officers in plain clothes in an unmarked vehicle. And the lack of accountability, the things that I have learned as far as the laws that are in place, qualified immunity at the top of the list, being in existence to protect officers and public officials, period, which that has a historical connotation as well. But the laws that exist to be able to protect them is not okay. And because of that, we continue to see a lack of accountability, and to your point, still being expected to show grace, to show forgiveness. We're having this conversation today about healing, but we have to have a conversation about the pain that we are talking about healing. And if we can't have an honest conversation about that, then we will continue to go around this merry-go-round. We will continue to have conversations, and there'll be little actions. There are things that can be done in a very big way, but we have to have individuals that are bold enough, strong enough, and caring enough to make those changes happen. It can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw in Amanda Gorman's inaugural poem, she said that hope and hurt are coexisting right now. And in order for us to move forward, we have to recognize that while we are hurting, there are many of us that remain hopeful, but we can't move forward without addressing that hurt, without acknowledging that it's present, and that's based on real things and real experience. And so, Chris, I want to bring you in because you work specifically with a population that is trying to navigate that. Can you share a little bit about how you are facing down racism while carrying out the work of the My Brother's Keeper program?
Yeah, absolutely. NBK was created, to help close some of those same disparity gaps, that go far back, to what Mr. Saunders is talking about education, talking about health, talking about safety and economics. And so in my role, I'm an advocate for, boys and young men of color, addressing some of those same needs. And over this past year, NBK has directly focused on, education and career readiness, simply through our grant program, funding three community partners that focuses on improving, high school success outcomes for our boys and men of color, right? And not just talking about when I graduate high school, what's next, but as an 8th grader, entering high school, am I socially and emotionally prepared to make that transition? Is my family prepared? You know, some of the things we don't talk about is how do we support families, how do we provide wraparound service for families, you know, that are helping their students transition to that road. Going into high school is a whole new world, and so, you know, partnering with, you know, Academy for Urban Solutions, you know, Cummins Refugees and Immigration Services, and the Urban League is addressing some of those same needs. And I think back to the conversation that we had prior to this meeting and talking about some movie called One Night in Miami. You know, Sam Cooke had made this statement, you know, I just don't want a piece of the American pie, I want the recipe. And so and thinking about that, I'm thinking, you know, America was built on slavery. And so why are we now asking for, you know, a piece of something that we built, you know, and it goes back to, you know, where we are now. We're asking for a part of history, we're asking for the American dream when we helped build the American dream.
And each of you have addressed systemic racism in your own way. Jerry, you shared the history and the economic impetus. Adrienne, you talked a little bit about law enforcement and criminal justice. And Chris, you've talked a little bit about addressing issues of poverty and also as well as education and educating our young men in particular. What I wanted to ask and kind of bring it back is we're living right now in what people are calling dual pandemics, right? We have the global pandemic of the coronavirus, but we also have that more experiential pandemic of police violence and Black lives in jeopardy. And so as you think about health and healthcare and these dueling pandemics, what does that elicit for you? What perspectives would you like to offer? Any of you can jump in terms of what we're kind of living in, because we're seeing the disparities with the infection rates and also the death rates with Black and brown communities, and we're also seeing obviously the overrepresentation of police violence in Black communities. So how are you kind of walking that fine line between those two pandemics, and how are you engaging with the communities you serve in that regard? Any of you can jump in.
While I see all of those issues and concerns, I have a lot of hope because I see the young folks, what's happening with the young people rising up, and not only just, now I'm not going to say protesting, I'm going to say it's a movement. It's not a protest, it's a movement, it's ongoing. And they're looking at it from the standpoint of legislatively, and it's a whole bunch, all, if we want to say races, all ages, and everybody else. And I don't think that it's something that it's just temporary. It's a movement that is going, and it is going strong. I think that the big piece is the truth that is out there. That's what will save us actually knowing the truth. And this technology allows for young people to get to that. So when we say make changes, I say there should be affirmative action and compensatory action. Affirmative action is leveling the playing field right now. Yeah. Compensatory action is making up for what has occurred, because for us as African Americans, and we haven't even spoken about the Native American, the indigenous people who were here, whose land was taken. But talking about African Americans on there, I'd say 13 to maybe 15 generations of us didn't have that opportunity for generational wealth building. The opportunity we had was building other folks' generational wealth. We received generational trauma. And so it's been passed down from generation to generation, and then people will say, well, why don't you just go ahead and do what you need to do, don't worry about it. Well, that did occur back in the 1860s with the Reconstruction period. From 1863 to 1877, Black folks did just rise up and start doing things and created their own community, politics, everything else. And then Rutherford B. Hayes, trying to win the election, pulled the National Guard out of the South so that the Ku Klux Klan could come in, and all that violence and everything occurred at that time to suppress that movement that Black folks were making at that time. Yeah. I think that suppression still occurs. It's just more sophisticated. And I think that the young people that I see and know, like you guys, are on it. And that makes me feel good about it. I don't think it's going to take all that time, and I appreciate what everybody else has done, including people in my generation and myself. We moved little by little, but I think you guys got it moving a lot faster. And the fact that we're here today talking about racism like we are is a major piece too. So I just got a lot of hope about it and where we headed.
Thank you, Adrienne. Chris, and you want to?
Yeah, so to Mr. Saunders' point, we're not going anywhere. And like you said, the young people that are out there now, they have that zeal. It is up to us as elders and our elders to bring them in and teach them the historical piece so that we are able to continue to connect these dots. Because again, like Mr. Saunders said, there were some of our ancestors who were doing the work, who had come together collectively to build wealth, to build communities. And every single time that it happened on a grand scale, trauma, terror came in and destroyed those communities. Not because they were doing anything illegal, but it was because they were thriving. That is an issue. That is generational trauma. How do we deal with that now?
Yeah.
Because it is a lot of it in our communities. Our young people that are getting gunned down and this violence that we are seeing, it did not just happen in 2017 when we had our highest number of homicides in Columbus. It didn't just happen last year when we surpassed that number. This has been going on. There are services, there are finances that are available for the services that we need to implement real healing in our communities, and that money is always diverted somewhere else. We cannot and we will not continue to accept that.
Chris, you want to add anything on that for you?
Absolutely. I think everything that NBK has done, has been done in a way that we allow our youth to have the platform to lead. Like Mr. Saunders said, everything this summer was youth-led. And for us as adults now, we have to provide them the resources to lead, but also allow them to lead and make those mistakes so that they can take over. We've done a lot of grant programs even this summer, when we seen that rise in violence, when we seen, a lot of the recreational parks or programs had to cut back due to COVID, we were able to then fund 3 community organizations that allowed us to pay our youth, but also receive programming, mentoring, Wellness Wednesdays, and have those tough conversations with cops. I remember one of the programs that we funded through the CARES Act dollar was Legacy U. Legacy U had these conversations called Wellness Wednesdays, and on that Wednesdays they brought in 2 police officers, 2 black police officers, and they had those conversations. The police officers asked the youth, what is it that we can do to make you guys feel safer in the community? And it's having those conversations about, what it is that we're missing, and filling those gaps. And for the youth, having them show that, we're nothing to be afraid of. And so everything that we've done is striving toward providing that opportunity to ensure that our youth are successful long term, because how we equip them now coming out of this pandemic will let us know that the longevity we have, in breaking down some of those barriers and habits that we had going into it. I think one thing I will say is that I think COVID has allowed for the bar to be set low, right? Because it was easy to give up. Basically, since you had 18 months worth of almost a throwaway year. And so to break those habits, we have to continue to set the bar high for our students. Not only for our students, but our youth, right? The bar is here. No matter what you come out of COVID, we still have that bar to be high. And the same with education. Education essentially almost as if you got to pass, right? There's no testing, so youth lost that motivation. And so making sure that giving our students that key to education is a foundation, but also providing some experience, some mentorship, and some guidance into the future will help our youth propel in the future.
Yeah, you touched on something that I wanted to explore a little further in the idea of conversations. And for those of us who have been a part of this work for a very long time, there's a lot of people who are saying the time of talking is over. We actually need to start acting and doing. And while I agree with that sentiment, I do believe that there's space and there's room for conversation. One of the things that I like to talk about with others who are engaged in this work is that no one can do something well that they can't also speak to well. You have to be able to explain what you're doing. You have to be able to have the conversation in order to do the work. And so how do we encourage, in that vein, how do we encourage more listening, dialogue, and understanding? And when we are trying to have these conversations, where should they happen? And anyone can jump in on that.
I think we are most comfortable, I think that sometimes we can sit from a place of privilege, right? Because we have our degrees, we have a good working paying jobs, but, people outside of our people that we know, are suffering. We're in Black people are in survival mode, and you've seen that through the pandemic. And so for us, it's being able to listen where they feel most comfortable, right? Going to their communities, going to the schools, going to the community centers. Columbus has a tremendous amount of programming that addresses a lot of the needs that we have, but it's about giving the families in the community the access to that, right? Finding out how do you access a lot of the programs and resources that we have. We see a lack of parent engagement. We've seen a lack of parent engagement in the past, and so for us, it's asking a question to the parents: how is it best that we engage you? Because ultimately, they have the decision on helping our youth move forward. But it's asking those tough questions. How were you today? Are you able to pay the rent? How can I provide you your son with mentoring? Do you need transportation? We know that that's a need, right? Asking those questions that sometimes may be uncomfortable, but in the end, it will get us to where we need to move the needle going forward.
Yeah. Anyone, you want to jump in?
Yeah. And I agree with Mr. Suel, except I would ask him if I would have permission to change, to talk where it's most comfortable to where it's most needed. And the reason I say that is because, for instance, an example would be a lot of times when the election comes up, you will have white politicians come to Black churches and talk about racism and helping out in the neighborhood. I think they need to go to the white churches and talk about that and what's needed and how everybody can work together instead of just coming and giving lip service there, but actually go to make some action occur with some folks who may have the influence to make that occur. So I just wanted to just add on top of that to what he said right there.
That's a good point.
And I think, it's going on now, people talking more, and you're going to get the negative and the positive, but at least people are talking and trying to figure out things. But at the end of the day, I still think the truth is the best thing because, most of us believe what our significant other, our parents or whoever's close to us teach us. Mm-hmm. Most of us believe that. And sometimes we grow up a little older and we go, wow, that wasn't true. Mm-hmm. Some things we accept it and leave it alone, some things we don't. And so things like Santa Claus. Yeah. I hope our kids aren't watching, but we little and we go Santa Claus, and we get older and we go, what? Yeah. And then when we get kids, Santa Claus. Mm-hmm. Now that's something simple, but take racism, bias. When somebody's teaching that I'm better than you or I'm not as good as you when you're younger, and they get older and find out that it's different, and then we start doing it with our children because with African Americans, we want our children to be safe. So we're saying, hey, watch it when you go out and how you drive, and that permeates and that changes that kid from feeling like I can just do whatever I want to, got that energy. Yeah. So it's just a lot of those things. And I think that is detrimental in a number of ways because we do pass. I mean, it's a simple thing. We teach sunrise and sunset. Mm-hmm. We know that the sun stay right where it is and the earth just rotates. Yeah. Why don't we teach people that, but we teach them. I'm just saying we get accustomed to teaching lies like that. So when we start telling lies, people do not respond or hold people accountable for lies as we just have experienced.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's true is we are a society built around kindness and being polite. And sometimes that kindness and that willingness to be polite allows things that are the most devastating to persist because we're not willing to have the hard and necessary conversation that may put you in a position where you're a little uncomfortable and you're a little stressed. But if that's the necessary conversation, the reality is we have to resist the urge of that retreat, that walking away from that hard or difficult conversation because it's so necessary. And because we want to speak truth to power, and we want to make sure that we're able to demystify this idea of race and racism in our society. And so the point that you opened with, in that having majority and majority people and white people have conversations among themselves about these issues as they become more informed and more educated on the issues, is an important aspect of disruption. Mm-hmm. Before we transition, Adrienne, did you want to jump in or add anything to that, or?
I kind of wanted to go back to something that Chris brought up earlier as far as the access and the help to the young people. Personally, because I worked in the district for so many years, we need to get to the babies. We spend a lot of time on intervention. when we could be doing a whole lot more with prevention? Why do we have to have our 7th and 8th graders and our high schoolers going through all of these areas of trauma and then expressing that out into the community? When I went to a summons years ago when my sons were younger, and it was called Breaking the Academic Gap Between African American Males and Everyone. And the specialist that came in and spoke to us said that based off a 2nd and 3rd grade test, they already know how many prisons they need to build. 2nd and 3rd grade. So by the time we get to 7th and 8th grade, there's a lot of children who have already been written off. That's not okay. You are saying that a 7 or 8-year-old, you have already checked the box on?
Yeah.
That's not okay.
That's true.
And that goes to those hard conversations that we need to have, because in that session that I went to, I sat at the table with educators who were from the suburbs. They thought I was an educator. So they're like, well, what do we do with them? I clenched my bag because I have 2 of them that you're referring to. And when they realized that I wasn't a teacher, I said, I don't know, maybe you could try talking to them like you do the rest of your students. Expressing the same respect level that you do to the rest of your students. Their faces were cherry red because they thought that I was an educator. And for our school systems to have so many European American teachers, male and female, in those spaces, like you said, the hard conversations have to be had, but we cannot just have conversations. At that point, you have to have a heart check, and you have to be determined to make those changes, because they are leading our children.
Chris, go ahead.
Just to mention something, you spoke about the preventative work. A lot of what MBK does is preventative work, right? But it's through our grant programs and through our grantees. A lot of the work that we not even task, but ask them to do when applying for this grant is provide those preventative measures to allow our students to have that toolkit to be successful. And when I said access, I meant access because having the access for the parents to get. We do so much work as it pertains to our boys and men of color, but people don't know how to access that information. It's out there.
Absolutely.
Technology is right there. And so providing opportunities and resources that families can access at a greater level is why I said access. But people don't know that a lot of the work that we do ensures it's preventative work to ensure a lot of the things that go in our communities don't happen. When we had that summer program, we had over about 200 kids that were part of that summer youth program. And out of those 200 kids, we only had 3 kids that were involved in criminal activities. And so when I say preventative work, that's the work that we're doing through them that gives our students an opportunity to grow.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. We will move the questions from our live stream audience in just a few minutes. But before we move on, I wanted to go back to something that, Adrienne, I think you said, and when you were at that conference. We talk about the willingness to resist that urge to retreat or to walk away from the difficult conversation. You could have easily done that. You could have easily decided, I'm not going to speak up. I'm just going to let them say what they say and move on. But you also could have canceled them, right? And so when we talk about resisting that urge to retreat, we're also talking about resisting that urge to cancel and bring people into the conversation so that we can provide more information, lead to more discussions, and inform people in ways that may change their perspectives or give them just another point of view as it relates to the Black experience in America. But when thinking about the majority population, how might they become more allied towards equity?
I can go. I wanted to do comment on what I'm ready on what she said on there is that, right, we want to have that conversation, but there's got to be a willingness to want to change. And right now, I believe that COVID, and the reason I know that people have lost folks and they're sick and all that, and I definitely have my condolences on that. I do look at that word because, like I say, I look at words of history per COVID, and I go call out the CO, the VID, the vivid truth. Now, you can see it in a number of areas, economically, health, education, all of those places you see it. So when you say people, white folks, black folks, anyone who want to help, it's obvious right now. I mean, it's just right there, and it's not going anywhere soon. So we can work towards making that happen. I think people got to look at their individual biases, too, to make sure that they really are doing something that's coming from their heart as opposed to trying to prove something.
Yeah.
And so the one quick test on the educators was, and I won't go into all the details, but this guy did a test where he had teachers they were at a teachers conference, and he had a video, and he had the teachers look into this video, and they were to look for issues that children, the real small children, were having, so that they could prevent them from being troublemakers in the class. I'll try to be quick with this, too. And so what they had on there was a machine that could trace where their eyes would go to. So they had the black girl, black boy, white girl, white boy. And what they did with all the teachers, majority teachers, when they looked for the trouble, they were trying to look for, most of them, that machine could tell where they looked at the black boy, automatically. Now, when he told them afterwards, and told them what was going on, they did not want to acknowledge so that he could write this down officially, what they had experienced. But he still wrote it down without using their. But that's something right there. They saw that they had something to prove their bias. Mm-hmm. But because of their self-pride or whatever the case may be, they did not want to acknowledge that they did that.
Yeah. Either one of you want to just add anything on how we get the majority population to engage in these equity efforts and be seen as allies or co-conspirators in doing this work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest things, and we've seen, in working with Mr. Saunders this summer, is increasing funding. We see time and time again where funding is only on a yearly basis, and there's so many organizations that are on the grassroots levels doing the work, but they don't have the capacity. But how do we help them build capacity, provide more training? They may not have a fiscal manager. A lot of these organizations that can take in these small organizations, it's helped be their fiscal manager. And so I think providing funding, more funding on an annual basis instead of a yearly basis will go a long way in providing opportunity for our youth to stay engaged this summer.
Yeah.
Well, we definitely need to have more grassroots organizations getting the funding. Mm-hmm. I have, again, been in this just really in the last 4.5 years as far as organizations and grassroots organizations and the things that they, that they get involved in, and funding is always an issue. And to learn that there are, to your point, there's fiscal agents that they have to go to get this funding. The challenge to me is the fiscal agents not really believing in the grassroots work, which could then line up with their biases potentially. So they're not given the funding, even though they're continuing to do the work. Like Divine One Health, Esther does a phenomenal job on the West Side with the street sisters, does a phenomenal job. But funding, I have seen her go down to city council and almost scream to the top of her lungs trying to get funding. We have to figure out a way, as you said, to be able to get that access to the grassroots organizations, because honestly and truthfully, they are the ones that are doing the work. They are taking the risk, even in COVID. They are taking the risk and getting out there to help our, our most disadvantaged people.
Yeah, historically, social change has been built on the backs of the grassroots, particularly Black-led grassroots organizations.
Absolutely.
And so that investment is necessary in order for the change to really be sustained. Jerry, one last question, then we're going to go to Jane.
All right, I was just going to say, most of what we're saying is resource, opportunity, and remove the barriers. Yeah. And we got it.
Yeah, thank you.
There it is.
Jane, please, any questions from the live stream?
We have a lot of questions that were submitted ahead of time, as well as quite a few on the live stream, so I'm going to go quickly. Tom Carlisi from Carlisi and Associates: what is being planned systematically in our community to foster more empathy and understanding between sectors of our community that are divided in order to encourage more experiential, constructive connections and behavior change?
Anyone want to? What I would say is, and please feel free to jump in, I'll respond at least a little bit, is that many organizations are setting up these community dialogues that are inviting in more constituents to be part of the cultivation of solutions. And so what I would say to that question in particular is that creating systemic solutions will require systemic participation. So because what usually happens is when we start having these community conversations, often they're led and run by grassroots organizations, and often the participants are largely nonprofit organizations, community members, and other smaller groups. And the private sector isn't present for those conversations. And so in order for a systemic change to happen, you need a diverse population part of the conversation, seeking those solutions, not only representing cultural identity, but also representing personal and professional interests, like the private sector, like government, like nonprofit, all collectively solving for the same thing. You bring that diversity of thought, you're going to get some systemic solutions. Anyone else?
I have to disclose that Tom Carlisi and I are good friends. Okay. But we actually helped bring nonviolent communication to the city of Columbus. And we had gotten out of Atlanta from Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, and it advocates this type of conversation that is going on. And it has been not just here in Columbus, but around the state and around actually the world. He's moved it to other places, other countries.
Thank you.
Suzanne Davis, Questline Inc. As a small company of less than 50, we'd like to have more diverse population of employees, but we don't often have job openings, and when we do, the applicants come from the broadest of job boards like Indeed and LinkedIn do not represent the Columbus population, and our qualified pool of applicants is not very diverse. We've tried advertising in a couple new places, Black Columbus and Stonewall, but have not seen a change. We don't have relocation benefits available, so posting in HBCs outside of CBUS is not helpful. What can we do?
I would say provide more internships. You know, a lot of the large organizations or small organizations having internships with some of our high school students that need, our internship hours, even college students that need internship hours is good, because then, one, that's word of mouth, and it's also opportunity for those students who then finish school to come back and have somebody already have familiarity with your organization. So offering internships, reaching out to city schools, offering them, you don't have to pay them a lot of money, but providing them access at younger ages then gives opportunity for those students once they get older and have familiarity to come back and then be an employee of a diverse market.
Is your organization a touch point to find interns?
Yes, we are in a touch point.
Okay. Mary Rosling of Fifth Third, how can I continue to educate myself as a white person? What can I do to help the black community? There's bias in every race. I believe we each have to do better and be better. What are ways that we can do, what are things that we can do on a day-to-day basis to prevent bias or to teach our next generation to not repeat history?
My favorite saying is build community. And it's the same, I don't care what group of folks you are, you have the same needs in those communities for a good health care system, good education system, all of those employment, good housing, all of those things are needed in all of the communities. But for whatever reason, it's separate in different communities. And if we're going to make those changes, people need those things in order to have those type of communities. And so it's a bigger than, so I know that one person can't do that. They're asking about themselves, but any kind of way they can contribute to that. And I say the same on employment. You start employing people, then you get connected to more folks. But what I do say, I appreciate whatever they're doing, but I do know that, particularly in this city, a lot of cities, when somebody wants a good coach or a good player, they work it out. They get it figured out. They put forth the effort from that whole organization to go recruit the kind of person that they need. And I think the same thing can go on in terms of employment.
And I think that social media, it can be used for a good thing. And not that people have a lot of time, to just browse through social media, but look for different things that you may not have ever thought about attending, and attend those things. People are doing Zooms all day long, and just jump on some of those to, diversify yourself.
Yeah, I think the key is really educating yourself and seeking out the information. There are many books, there's many blogs, there's many podcasts that will give you the type of information you'll need that you could then activate and act on. And what's also true is those people in your group, the ones that do have that knowledge, try to have conversations with them across difference rather than quizversations. I think one thing that is true is as more of our white allies want to have conversations, what they really become is kind of quizzes in terms of what they should do, what they shouldn't do, and how to, and that's not dialogue, that's not rapport. So understanding that we're bringing these unique lived experiences to the conversation, engage in that and be willing to be vulnerable and share your misunderstandings, the myths that you grew up believing that have informed your biases. Because, coming to me or any of us looking to learn without revealing any of the complexities of your understanding, it's really just you trying to have me solve your problems, and that's not a true dialogue. Let's have some conversation about what you misunderstand, what you may have believed in the past that you want to think differently about, and in that way we can be more collaborative in how we solve problems.
This question is from Randy Weston from T. Marzetti, and he says it's a two-part question. Where's the balance between reaching and educating those who are already set in their ways versus the younger generation where there are still impressionable years left to really make change? And second, how do you continue to raise the awareness of other ethnicities who either don't realize that real racism exists or they are a minority with the different but similar problems of their own?
I think I can sum that up, both of those questions in one, with one particular scripture. In the word it says that basically if somebody is willing to listen, when you go to them and you talk to them and they're not able to be reasoned with, you shake the dust off of your feet and you keep moving. There are going to be some that we are going to be able to penetrate their hearts, and they're going to have that desire to change. They're going to have that desire to want to become a part of God's community, right? And then there's going to be some that just are not willing to look at people as individuals as opposed to a collective of people. So when you have those type of situations, you do what you can, knowing that you've done your best, and you keep moving.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Adrienne, that our obligation is to engage in consistent action. Our obligation is not to change anyone's minds. And so whenever we see something that's problematic, our requirement is to speak on it. And whether it changes your mind or not. And so those people who are resistant to change, resistant to understanding and different perspectives, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to continuously bring it up whenever I see it. And so that's ultimately the mandate, is when you see something that's wrong, when you see something that requires addressing, you address it and you bring it up always. That consistent action does lead to change. And so, and I think going back to our young people are watching and they're learning and they're bringing their own ideas and energy. And so we need to create pathways to amplify their voices as well, because there's a lot we can learn from them.
Tim Hopman, how can we develop better collaboration across groups in different cities across Central Ohio? And he doesn't designate anything about what groups he's talking about.
So I want to ask Jerry to speak on this one, because I think you're pretty familiar with this particular. So if you think about, they said different groups within Central Ohio. If you think about Bexley, and we use Nelson Road as the divide. Right. You talk about dystopia versus utopia. How would you recommend we engage a community like Bexley in this conversation, knowing that they neighbor a community that is having an entirely different experience?
Well, it's interesting you asked me that, because one of my mentors is Mark Fankenoff, and he was the city developer of Bexley for 26 years, right? And he has been one teaching me about community for so long. And so the difference that I see there, that was set up to build community. Everything that's needed for those folks there, that pride, everything in terms of the investments and all were there. African American community, anywhere in the country, you see the freeway go right straight through where our business and our residents were, and that was done a while ago, and that was intentional. So when you talk about community, We already know what's happened. The same thing happened with the soldiers and everything else. So I know we are getting short on time, so I'll hold up on that. But I would just suggest people look up Red Summer.
Yeah,
1919, Red Summer.
thank you. Jane, yeah.
I'll just conclude. Sean, you mentioned parental involvement, engagement. What kinds of things are you doing to make sure that parents really are engaged so that students do have an upbringing and they can get a lot of that influence from a good home?
Well, this summer, I mean, not this summer, but, when online learning started, NBK launched this Boost program, which was bridging optimism and opportunity for our students, which allowed us to be allowed us to partner with 10 community organizations to provide, the academic assistance that students needed. And we've seen that when the pandemic started, the Black community suffered because we weren't prepared for online learning. And so addressing that instant need of education, but also using CARES Act dollars to fund community organizations that are in these students' circumference, meaning that they feel comfortable going to our rec centers, they feel comfortable going to program managers who are leading these organizations, because that's where their comfort is. And so for parents, it's staying involved, right? Making sure that students, work is being checked, making sure they know that they're going to this rec center at this time, keeping the students engaged is a way to keep them away from staying in trouble. And I think that by using the LECs to one, give our students programming, academic assistance, meals, and mentorship helped, during this fall semester of online learning. So, for us, that's a key. And then, staying up to date with NBK updates. NBK has done a lot. Most recently, we launched our We Rise Scholarship Fund that addresses the educational gap that kids have, especially during the pandemic. And so with that scholarship fund, it allows kids to pursue higher education if they want it. And so, like I said, we talked about other resource access for parents is what's the best way for us to reach you so that you can know opportunities that students have to stay engaged.
Thank you, Jerry Saunders, Adrienne Hood, Chris Suel. Thank you for this conversation, engaging this dialogue. I know there's so much more that we can talk about, and we're really just scratching the surface of these conversations. But I think the most important point is that these conversations have to continue, as well as the work. So I appreciate the time. I'll turn it back over to Steve Marks to close us out. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, LaShaun. I hope you found today's forum enlightening and hopeful, maybe at times difficult, but there's a lot of work to be done. It should not be intimidating. It should be inspiring. And if all of us move daily and try and be better people and work together, I think we can accomplish great things. I really I've got a few announcements here. Our forum next week will feature a conversation on race, equity, and how all of us can be involved in conversations towards change. Thanks for our live stream support today, presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the United Way of Central Ohio, the Columbus Dispatch, and PNC, sponsored by Encova and Marzetti, and all of our online virtual seat patrons. Thank you all. A special thanks to our speakers. We could not do this without you, Chris Suel, Adrienne Hood, Jerry Saunders, and LaShaun Carter. We hope to see you again soon, but until then, be well and stay safe.